This is a great opportunity. I'm looking forward to talking a little bit about U.S. policy in Africa, our approach. As Kate said, I'm with the U.S. State Department, and I've served in West Africa. I've served in Southern Africa. I've traveled throughout the continent. Indeed, I was just in South Africa just about a week ago. It's a very exciting time, I think, to be working in Africa in the U.S. State Department and in Washington, D.C. I can say that in my 30-year career in the Foreign Service, there has probably never been a greater focus on Africa. I think Americans are realizing that very much Africa is the future. It's more of a center of our efforts and our partnership than it's ever been before, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this morning. But first of all, I'd like to thank the African Center for Strategic Studies for inviting me to speak here today. ACSS plays a critical role in facilitating dialogue like the one I hope that we'll have here today, because I'm going to talk a little bit, but I really hope that you'll have lots of questions and we can sort of focus the conversation. But it plays an important role in facilitating dialogue among African security professionals and their American international counterparts. And this seminar is a terrific initiative, and it'll give all of you important tools that you need to advance security and development in your home countries. And it's also a great way to strengthen the partnership between the U.S. government, all of you here today, and your host country governments. Africa faces many security challenges. I think that's clear, and it's imperative that we work together to overcome them. Peace and stability are the foundations for progress in democracy and in economic growth. You're all the next generation of leaders in African security, and we're all excited to be working with you to accomplish our goals together. And again, I think you're all the next generation of leaders. That's one thing to think about. In 10, 15, 20 years, you're all going to be in very senior positions. You're all going to know each other. Hopefully, you're all going to know us. And we're going to be working on African security. So it's terrific to have this opportunity to speak today. I'm going to talk about the State Department's top priorities in Africa. And there's 4 of them. So keep that in mind as we move forward. Sometimes we call them the 4 pillars of our policy in Africa. The number 1 pillar is strengthening democratic institutions. And that's our first priority in Africa, is strengthening democratic institutions. We continue to support on-time, free, peaceful, and fair elections across the continent. Now, we've seen, I think, that democracy can succeed. And I think the best, most recent example, one that I think really made a lot of us stand up and take notice, was the elections in the Nigerian presidential elections this spring. It was an example where you saw all the elements come together in a way that really made us feel proud and confident. First of all, people were determined to get out and vote. Their votes were counted, and really importantly, because we don't always see this, the candidates who lost accepted and respected the results. That's really important. Another example that's going on right now, I mean, one reason you're listening to me right now and not to Assistant Secretary Thomas Greenfield is because she has flown out to Cote d'Ivoire to attend the inauguration of the president who was recently reelected there. So yet another example of a successful election. But challenges do remain. African democratic progress is at risk when leaders refuse to step aside when their terms end. We believe it's harmful to stability and prosperity when leaders change constitutions solely so they can remain in power. You know, President Obama has talked a lot about this, and I think it's really important. What Africa needs is not so much strong men, but strong institutions. And strong institutions means respecting constitutions and rules in place and not changing them so that one can stay in power past the end of their term. Now, elections are a key focus of our policy of strengthening democratic institutions, but solid democratic governance is about much more than that. A real democracy upholds universal human rights, such as freedom of speech, press, and assembly. African countries need governments that deliver services, independent judiciaries that enforce the rule of law, professional security forces that respect human rights, and a free and responsible press and a dynamic civil society. All of these things are just as important as elections, and we look forward to partnering with Africa to make advancements in all of these areas. So if the first pillar of our policy in Africa is strengthening democratic institutions. Our second is increasing economic growth. In addition to strong democracy, Africa's progress will depend on unleashing economic growth, and that requires trade and investment. Most U.S. trade with Africa is with just 3 countries, and those 3 countries are South Africa, Nigeria, and Angola. And much of that is in the form of energy. But we want to diversify U.S.-Africa trade. So we're increasing trade missions, and we're sending trade missions now to Tanzania, to Ethiopia, to Mozambique. And I'd also note here the reauthorization of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which I think people usually call AGOA, by Congress in June. It was huge news. It sent a strong signal to investors that now is the time to invest in Africa. Since AGOA's passage 15 years ago, it has promoted diversified, value-added manufacturing. It spurred the creation of 300,000 jobs on the continent, and it's helped make African countries more attractive for foreign investment. And as a vital complement to AGOA, the President's initiative, the Power Africa initiative, seeks to create 30,000 megawatts of clean energy and increase electricity access to at least 60 million new connections in the coming years. So we're working to influence U.S. companies to invest in Africa's agriculture, its infrastructure, and its energy sectors. And at last year's U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit, U.S. companies pledged $33 billion in new trade and investment. President Obama also announced $7 billion in new financing to promote U.S. exports and investments in Africa under the Doing Business in Africa campaign. So the first 2 pillars, again, are promoting democratic institutions. The second is spurring economic growth. Our third is promoting opportunity and development. So ensuring economic growth, and it's interesting the way all these pillars really sort of link in together. None of them sort of survive on their own. But ensuring economic growth requires promoting opportunity and development. And I think this is an important point, and I understand there's been some discussion about the youth bulge in Africa during the conference, and I'm happy to talk more about that in the question and answer. But Africa is the youngest and fastest growing continent. Africa's population in the coming decades will double to 2 billion people, and many of them will be under the age of 18. Indeed, there's many countries represented in this room where more than half of the population is under the age of 15, which is unimaginable in other parts of the world. A lot of people are looking at this as a challenge, but we also believe that it's going to bring great opportunities. Through the President's Young African Leadership Initiative, YALI, we're investing in the next generation of African leaders by building leadership skills, boosting entrepreneurship, and connecting young African leaders with one another, the United States, and the American people. We're bringing Africans to the United States for training. We're putting different programs online so people can access online programs. We've established regional leadership centers with leadership programs on the continent and in Africa. And I have to tell you, I don't see President Obama more excited about any other program in Africa. As interested as in Africa, he's very interested in reaching out to the young people of the continent. I'd also like to note our work in the health sector. We're continuing to work with our partners in the fight against Ebola, HIV/AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis. And I'd really like to point out here the initiative which began under the Bush administration but continues under the Obama administration, and that's the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, Pepfar, which is the largest single international health initiative in the history of our planet that President Bush began and President Obama continues in the fight against HIV/AIDS. And also the Global Health Security Agenda. Pepfar has made tremendous strides in combating HIV/AIDS, and indeed, it's saved millions of lives already. Finally, if we talk about, again, strengthening democratic institutions, spurring economic growth, we talk about increased opportunity and development, and the final point, and probably the most relevant to this class, is advancing peace and security. Without peace and security, we can't achieve the stability that's fundamental to accomplishing all of the goals that I've already talked about. Conflict destabilizes states and borders, stifles economic growth and investment, and it robs young Africans of the opportunity for an education and a better life. There has been a notable reduction in the number of African conflicts over the past decade, but combat, instability, and political unrest persists in many parts of the continent, including Somalia, South Sudan, the Lake Chad Basin, Mali, the Central African Republic, and the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, we're working with our partners in the international community, with the UN, with the African Union, and others in the international community to end the conflicts so that peace and economic progress can replace instability and uncertainty. We're also focused on developing professional and capable military, police, and maritime security forces to safeguard democratic institutions and address transnational security threats. One of our top priorities is promoting the development of professional security institutions that respect the rule of law, civilian control, and human rights. We have been deeply engaged in developing security institutions in post-conflict countries, for example, Liberia and the Democratic Republic of Congo. We are also at the forefront of an effort to stand up a more professional and effective Somali National Army in order to assist the federal government of Somalia in mitigating the threat posed by al-Shabaab. During the African Leaders Summit, the President announced the Security Governance Initiative, an SGI as we call it. SGI represents a comprehensive approach to improving security sector governance in Africa, and it's being launched in 6 countries: Ghana, Kenya, Mali, Niger, Tanzania, and Tunisia. The SGI approach is based on partnership and joint analysis of the opportunities and challenges government face, and these partnerships encourage strategies and information exchange between organizations to address shared security challenges. Critical to our ability to address both current and future conflicts on the continent is our effort to support African peacekeeping forces. And we're building African peacekeeping capabilities at 3 levels: at the African Union headquarters, in sub-regional organizations, and at the level of individual member states. At the regional level, we funded a peace and security advisor for the AU's Peace Support Operations Division through the Global Peace Operation Initiative, and we've worked with the AU Command and control capabilities through the AU Command. At the sub-regional level, along with the Department of Defense, we've supported multinational exercises for ECOWAS, for SADC, and for the Eastern Brigade of the African Standby Force. And at the individual member level state, we focused on building the capability of our African partners to contribute to AU and UN peacekeeping operations. During the African Leaders Summit, President Obama further underscored our commitment to peace and security through the creation of the Africa Peacekeeping and Rapid Response Partnership, which we call APREP. Over a 3 to 5 year period, APREP will allow the United States to help build and institutionalize the rapid response capabilities of 6 partners: Ethiopia, Ghana, Rwanda, Senegal, Tanzania, and Uganda. The AU, the African Union, is one of our key partners, and we're providing substantial operation support for AU operations. We're supporting the AU mission in Somalia, and it's contributing countries with equipment, logistics, and training. We're also providing equipment and training to the UN Integrated Multidimensional Support Mission in Mali. We've committed to providing up to $100 million in similar support to African forces deployed in the Central African Republic under regional auspices, and now under the UN Multidimensional Stabilization Mission in CAR, which is called MINUSCA. Now, terrorism, I think probably everyone here knows, is also a concern for the United States. And also in Africa, we're seeing violent extremist groups based in Libya, northern Mali, Nigeria, and Somalia have proven to be resilient, adaptable, and capable of launching attacks across borders on the continent. These terrorists exploit hatred, alienation, economic deprivation, marginalization, ignorance, and religious perversity for their own destructive purposes, particularly among young people. Fortunately, Africa has dramatically intensified its individual and collective efforts to take greater ownership of its own security efforts to combat terrorism. The AU mission in Somalia and the more recent creation of the multinational joint task force under the African Union with the participation of Nigeria, Niger, Cameroon, Chad, and Benin is the most recent example of the deepening commitment by African countries to fight terrorism. African forces, many of them trained by the United States, but also many trained in other parts of the world, responded to the situation in Mali and worked alongside the French military to push back al-Qaeda in the Maghreb from safe havens in northern Mali. And African and partner forces continue to take significant casualties in Mali and elsewhere, but these losses have not weakened their resolve to counter the terrorism threat. Our whole of government approach reflects a common understanding that terrorists can't be defeated by the force of arms alone. We recognize that to defeat terrorism, we have to build strong civilian and security sector institutions and create durable capabilities that are essential to help Africans pursue this conflict. While military, intelligence, and law enforcement tools are vital to defending against violent extremism, we need a comprehensive strategy that includes all of these factors. So in conclusion, there's many examples, and I've talked about many of them today, of the ways in which we partner with Africa for advancing peace and security. I think it's really important that I explain that that's our approach. It's in partnership. This is not our fight alone, but it's something that we are extending our hand and partnering with Africans to pursue. And I want to close with words of encouragement. All of you here are leaders, and that's why you're here today. Take advantage of this great program and the tools, and I understand that it's already led to lively discussion throughout the session, and I think that's terrific that all of you are taking advantage of it. Please stay connected with the U.S. government as we work with you to improve our relationship, and perhaps most importantly, stay connected with each other as well. This is a terrific opportunity to reach hands across borders on the continent and get to know your fellow Africans. And now, if it's okay, I'd be very happy to take some questions. So thank you.